Welcome to the Sam Coding Fun Time Hour, a tech podcast where we talk about what it means to be a programmer after you are done learning how to code. Our guest this week is a hilarious Twitter tech comedian who loves to think outside of the box. Everyone give a warm Sam's Coding Fun Time Hour welcome to Cat Maddox. You're my first guest. Congratulations.
That's amazing, because if I do embarrass myself, no one will know.
No one will know. My many fans from the distant future will be reaching into my backlog to find every last drop, and they'll find this one. Hello, how's the year 2030 going?
Hopefully not huge climate catastrophe.
Unions and tech.
Unions and tech.
First time I ever really thought about it was when I saw you made a tweet about unionizing tech, and I never really thought about it. And everything feels so separate. Each company seems so insular that even teams within companies. I worked in Fannie Mae, which is a pretty big tech department, and outside of my team, I had no contact with other tech teams. So I really never thought of working with other people within other companies, across companies, to unionize. Is that just me, or is that kind of a fringe thought right now?
No, definitely not just you. I mean, the whole unions and tech thing has been kind of like a recent thought process that's been going on. It's really hard.
What are those benefits that unionizing can bring to the tech industry and its workers?
Unionizing in tech would benefit basically everyone in tech. Like, a lot of people have this misconception that unions are only for blue-collar workers and that no one in tech needs one. But unions are essentially just a way for workers to come together and get more done collectively than they could on their own. No matter how how well paid you think you are, every workplace does have its issues. If you worked in tech for any amount of time, you've probably encountered things like management ignoring your grievances, or being forced to work unpaid overtime, or even being discriminated against because of your gender or race. One example is I worked at this one place where we were all paid fairly well, but one of our gay co-workers was being abused by management, and we had no idea what to do because none of us had any experience in organizing as a collective. If we had any idea of how to actually work together as a union, we probably could have actually helped our co-worker. In the end, the structure of every workplace is the same. Workers have no voice above a superficial level, and if you disagree with management enough, you will be let go. Of course, obviously, workers in a minimum wage job are more exploited than tech workers, but the structure is still the same, which is why tech workers need to start organizing, because we're more powerful together than divided.
I never thought about it like that, that there are marginalized groups, not just issues of just general pay and general conditions. A lot of people are probably thinking, can't they just go to HR? But I have a feeling that's like that they don't want to upset management most of the time, and they'd rather listen to you and make you feel heard, and then kind of sweep it under the rug as best as possible, and rather pacify you rather than try to come to any solution that might involve upsetting the management.
100%, because there's this common saying that management is not your friend. And it's 100% true, because HR is paid by management, right? Like, it's the CEO, it's the investors who are paying HR salaries. So if there's ever any kind of conflict of interest between you and management, HR is always going to be on the side of management.
Yeah, if my current employer is listening, I have never had any issues, and I'm perfectly happy and would never.
No, never. No, don't even think about it. No, I've never been an advocate for unionization. No.
What if, not me, but what if some people listening would like to take some steps towards unionizing their workplace, What's what are actions they can take?
That depends a lot on people's situation. I think the first step is to actually just research what a union is and how it works. I think a good place to start, if you live in America, either the Tech Workers Coalition or the Industrial Workers of the World are both fairly decent unions who you could reach out to and start organizing with pretty much immediately if you wanted to. The other thing is, I think when people think of unions, they imagine these like huge, rigid bureaucracies, but it doesn't have to be that way. If there's an issue at your workplace, literally just you and like five of your coworkers can get together and have a chat about it outside of work and decide on what they want to do about it. You might decide that if there's a problem in your workplace, you can just work with your coworkers to put together a written demand to management. And that could be enough to solve whatever trouble you have. But yeah, if you do want to join a larger union, either the Tech Workers Coalition or the IWW is a good place to start.
Okay, there'll be links to all of those organizations in the show notes if anybody's interested. You're saying it's not just about the union itself, it's more about the collective action, so that can happen even at a small level.
Exactly. Yeah, a union is bad. I mean, just because you can get a lot more done collectively with your coworkers than you can on your own. If you have like a concern or a grievance on your own, management is not going to give it. But if you can actually talk to your coworkers about it and get them on your side and come together as an organized force, then you can basically do whatever you want. Management can't fire all of you.
Over the past few years, I've had to onboard quite a few new people to my team, and just imagining having to do that with a full new team from zero, that I can tell that that's something that lower management would be terrified of. It would just bring a complete halt to productivity.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
So now that people have an idea about what unions and collective action is and where to get started, some websites, what are some obstacles that they might encounter when trying to implement those
Yeah,
actions?
I think one of the biggest difficulties in getting tech unionized is that we just don't have any history of organizing. In my city, we have a firefighters union. And what the firefighters union did one time is they took out their trucks and they hosed down the roof of Parliament House when the government was trying to pass this shitty law that would lower their pay. And that's something that everyone is proud of. Every firefighter knows about the time the union hosed down Parliament House. Tech just doesn't have an equivalent to that. We've got this culture of staunch individualism with absolutely no history of collective action that we can be proud of. I think that's starting to change, but there's still a long road ahead. I think there's more problems with like how a lot of tech workers believe that they're just not oppressed enough to unionize. Like since we're paid well and our working conditions are normally quite okay, people think that there's no reason we should ever unionize. But there's so much that we can do beyond that. For example, we see a lot of people who absolutely hate the fact that GitHub is working with ICE. And people keep posting about how GitHub needs to drop ICE. But that's never actually going to just happen, because GitHub makes so much money off the ICE contract. And the only way they would ever change that is if workers in GitHub actually decided to get together about it and start, being an actual threat to management.
I think it all comes down to the corporate interest just trying to pacify concerns rather than address them. They have recently changed the default branch name from master to main.
Oh, racism solved.
Yes, exactly. And it's a fine gesture. I that was always a term that made me uncomfortable, but something difficult, like you said, with just to give some context for those who don't know, ICE is the immigration control agency in America, and they have been doing some ethically questionable actions revolving around detaining illegal immigrants, and they've been doing that increasingly, and including just approaching people on the streets and detaining them, and they're not police, so they don't have real courts, and they can kind of act with a level of aggression and without a level of accountability that police might be able to. And so the fact that GitHub is working and taking money from them and benefiting from that, there are a lot of people in the community who find that to be more problematic than the name of a default branch, and yet they have been, as far as I'm aware, largely silent on that issue. Is there?
No, I mean, just on the comparison to police, I'd like to point out that police also have absolutely no accountability, but that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, but I'm just like the immigration courts are separate from the regular courts. It's a big mess. Yeah, that's a whole different podcast episode for that. But yes, for the people who do find it morally questionable, you're right. If there was a way to come together instead of just yelling at them, activity on Twitter showing displeasure it could work, but it all depends on what GitHub actually perceives as a real threat.
Potentially, yeah. I do think that the real power does lie in the actual workers at GitHub, though. I mean, when we're posting on Twitter, when we're signing petitions about dropping ICE, we're basically just begging. We're asking. It's never worked in history. But if the workers at GitHub actually organized as a collective and had collective demands that they could put forward to management, then that would be a powerful thing.
Yeah, I agree. Something that's unique about your tech Twitter account is you tweet a lot about anarchism, which I find interesting. I enjoy that. Does your interest in anarchism relate to your ideas about collecting and unionizing within tech?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, before I start talking, I just want to make it clear that every anarchist is different, and not everyone who calls themselves an anarchist is going to agree with all the things I'll be saying, which is fine. They can be wrong if they want to.
I think it might be good right now to define anarchism, because I think a lot of people might when that word is said, it might come to mind burning buildings, toppling governments, lawlessness, like Mad Max.
Yeah, I define anarchism as a staunch opposition to social and economic domination of one person or group of people by another person or group of people. So, anarchism is a libertarian socialist position where we oppose both the state and capitalism. A lot of people don't get how that works because they think that socialism is just when the government does stuff, which is completely wrong. Socialism isn't about high tax rates or UBIs. It's about workers democratically controlling their workplace and their lives. And the way towards that is unionism. Not every unionist is an anarchist, and not every anarchist is a fan of unions, but that's my position. I think if anyone listening does want to learn more about anarchism, a really good place to start is by Googling "Are You an Anarchist?" by David Graeber. It's an amazing essay.
Or you can watch Monty Python and the Holy Grail and skip to the part with the anarchist syndicalist peasants and them back talking the king.
I love that bit. It's so good.
Now that you've explained what anarchism can mean in different ways, not just anarchy, but actually, one of my thoughts when I was reading up about it before was it kind of felt like agile.
Agile. Wow.
In agile, the idea is that you don't need a manager telling you to do your work every day, that you just agree on what's important and then you go do your work.
Yeah, I actually think you're really right. I mean, to be honest, I kind of hate agile, so the word doesn't have the best connotations to me. But when you think about it in the sense of just being like an organized collective of people who decide together what they're going to do, without anyone needing to direct them, then yeah, that's anarchism.
There can be a lot of negatives around it because of the poor implementation. I've never seen anything close to an actual agile environment.
You know what? Now that you mention it, I think the only times I've hated agile is when management has tried to get involved in it.
That makes a lot of sense because the ideas are completely
Mm.
incompatible. It's like saying I want the US federal government to be anarchist. It's
Exactly, there we go. Yeah. Anarchism is all about groups at the bottom, I guess, having the most power. Like instead of a structure we have now where like the people at the top of a hierarchy have the most power, like CEOs or like the state government, anarchism is the other way around. So you have these smaller community collectives that come together and make decisions. Then you federate outwards. So like collectives in a city might come together on a more regional level, but the people who represent the collectives at the regional level would have less power to make decisions than people in the collective themselves, if that makes sense.
at that point, it almost sounds like a republic where instead of the Republican government having the authority and the authority derives from the people, the government's more of a consensus mechanism rather than an authoritarian tool.
Basically, yeah.
Having it the other way makes more sense.
And I think what's really interesting is we say that we live in a democracy, but when you go to work, are you really working in a democratic structure? Like, if we're spending 40 hours a week at a place that's basically run as a dictatorship, then we are in no way living in a democratic place, you know? Like, we have absolutely no decision-making power at work above any kind of superficial level. Like, our lives are controlled by managers, by CEOs, by investors. This isn't democratic in any way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What are some misconceptions people may have about anarchism?
Ugh. Well, the one about chaos is definitely the most common one. And it's funny because on the left, we have this saying that if you want to have a good meeting, you should get an anarchist to facilitate it. Because anarchists basically spend 90% of our lives in leading groups and union meetings. Any anarchist who you find is way more likely to be like part of a meeting than they are to ever be throwing Molotov cocktails at anyone. Basically, all we do is like think about organizing and getting together as collectives. There's no chaos about it.
It sounds quite orderly.
Exactly. I mean, if you want to see chaos, you should look at the way our current society is run.
Are there any other things you hear from people that makes you feel like that they just don't get it when they interact with your anarchy tweets?
The one I hear so often is that anarchism is impossible. This one is interesting because when you think about it, anarchism is everywhere around you. Every time you're patiently waiting in line for something, even though there's no cops to stop you from pushing to the front, you're being an anarchist. Or if you've ever been part of like a club or a sports group or whatever, where decisions are made democratically instead of being imposed by a leader, then you've been a part of an anarchist organization. Anarchism is just how things work by default, and its hierarchies that politicians and owners of capital have built up, which are dysfunctional. If you want to see things on a bigger scale, anarchist societies have and do function. It had a lot of problems, but during the Spanish Civil War, anarchists did manage to actually take over large sections of the industry, and they started running industries in a libertarian socialist way. So workers actually had complete control over their workplaces. And people were happier, people worked better, like it just functioned way better than it did otherwise. Even in other areas of the world right now, we have the Zapatista movement. They don't define themselves as anarchists, but they are libertarian socialists who are currently making huge gains as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Before you referenced that we should think of a time when we were in a sort of self-organizing group. And I think one of the obstacles for people accepting anarchism is that, at least in my experience in America, that doesn't happen too often. You have hierarchies just in all parts of society. Like, I mean, I guess if you're with your group of friends and you decide to play tag, then the rules kind of just come about organically. But then once you want to play baseball, let's say, as part of a school team, then you have a coach and you have a captain, and they tell you when to come to practice. They punish you if you don't come to practice. They tell you what to do and how to do it. And if you don't toe the line, then you don't get to participate. So I think in America, we have hierarchies so deeply baked into the culture that it might be hard for people to understand how society can function without them.
Yeah, but that's a really sad thing. I think if people do want to know more about how anarchist societies can function, I do really recommend just reading some basic anarchist texts, like the one I mentioned earlier, Are You an Anarchist by David Graeber, or even just looking into the C&T during the Spanish Civil War or the Zapatista movement in Mexico. Some really amazing things would happen there that people can learn from.
Well, I think that sounds like the direction that we could benefit from moving into. And so it's just there's so many unintended consequences and accidental casualties of the rules that it really makes you question why have them in the first place.
100%, yeah. I mean, you can still have like an anarchist organization that has some set of, rules or policies that people have agreed on. But the difference is that they're decided on and enforced in a democratic way, not by top-down leadership.
More consensus, less authoritarianism. And I think that sounds great.
Yeah, it's what we should be doing.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being my first guest.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Sam's Coding Fun Time Hour. Please follow Maddox on Twitter. All of today's links can be found in the show notes. See you next week.